More than 90% of women in this country don't get enough of one particular nutrient. 97% of men don't either. And it's not the one your doctor usually asks about. It's not vitamin D. It's not iron. It's fiber, one very specific kind. Nutrition folks have a name for it: prebiotic fiber. It's not the bacteria themselves. It's the food that feeds the bacteria already living inside you. Most people know probiotics. The yogurt aisle's full of them. But a probiotic without a prebiotic is like sending a delivery truck to an empty house. Nobody's there to carry the boxes in. 14 plants on today's list. Everyone's either growing in a garden bed right now or marked down in the grocery bin because nobody wants the bruised, spotty ones. Number 14 surprised me the most. It's a starch most people toss the second it goes soft on the counter. And the trick to using it right runs backward from everything you'd guess. A review in the journal Nutrients put a number on the problem. The gap hasn't moved in years. Most adults aren't close. I spent 20 years as a registered nurse before I became a gardener. Not once did anyone ask what feeds the bacteria in a patient's gut. These plants feed short-chain fatty acids, compounds that go on to feed the wall of your own colon, the way compost feeds a garden bed. Nothing here replaces your doctor. We're starting with the plant most folks are yanking out of their flower beds this very week. It might be the best one on the list. Folks spend their whole spring digging this one out of the lawn. I understand the impulse. But dandelion root has been steeped, roasted, and chewed on for longer than most of our family trees go back. Here's the part that surprised me when I first read it. Dandelion greens carry around 4 grams of a fiber called inulin per 100 grams, and the root holds even more. Your stomach can't break inulin down. It just passes it along, whole, to the bacteria living further down the line. Think of it like this. You can't digest a peach pit either. It just rides on through. Inulin's a little like that, except your gut bacteria can break it down. And when they do, they make compounds called short-chain fatty acids. Those go on to feed the cells lining your colon, like compost feeding a row of beans. I'll be honest, was it my grandmother who used to roast dandelion root for coffee, or was that her sister Edith? Goodness, it's been a while. Either way, one of them did it every fall, and I never thought to ask why until I started reading the research myself. Evidence on dandelion root specifically is still thin compared to its cousin chicory, but the traditional use runs deep across European and Appalachian foraging traditions alike, and the inulin content has been measured directly. Preliminary observations suggest it behaves much the same way in the gut. Bitter. That bitterness is exactly the flavor that signals your body to get the digestive juices moving. Folks have used bitter roots and greens to open up an appetite since long before anyone had a microscope to explain why. A blessing from the soil, if you ask me, that something so stubborn in the lawn turns out to be this useful in the kitchen. Even the name gives it away, if you know where to look. Dandelion comes from an old French phrase, dent de lion, lion's tooth, on account of those jagged, toothy leaves. Somebody centuries back noticed exactly what we're only now measuring in a laboratory. The flowers are edible too, by the way. Folks have made fritters and even wine from them for generations. The French have another old name for the plant, pissenlit, on account of its traditional use as a mild diuretic. Every part of this so-called weed had a use to somebody once. Dig the whole root in early spring or late fall when the plant's putting its energy down low. Scrub it clean, slice it thin, and let the pieces dry for a few days before you roast them low and slow. Once they're dry and dark, grind them coarse and steep a spoonful in hot water for 10 minutes. Number 2 grows like it's trying to take over the whole back fence line. Burdock. Most people only know it as the plant whose burrs stick to the dog. Dig down, though, and you'll find a root that's been eaten across Japan, parts of Europe, and Appalachia for generations, sold in markets as gobo. Burdock root carries its own fructin fiber, the same broad family as inulin, and laboratory work has shown it feeds bifidobacteria, one of the main groups researchers consider the good residents of your gut, just as well as the more famous chicory version does. A laboratory study comparing burdock's fiber against chicory, long-chain inulin, and a purified prebiotic supplement found the burdock version held its own. Similar drop in gut pH, Similar bump in the friendly bacteria counts, and notably, none of the fibers tested caused bloating or gas in that trial, burdock included. I'll admit, burdock's a stubborn one to dig. The taproot runs deep, straight down like it's daring you to quit halfway. My back reminds me of that every single time. But that stubbornness is sort of the whole lesson, isn't it? The plants folks fight hardest to be rid of are so often the ones doing the most quiet good underground, feeding what we can't see, the way the Creator seems to have a habit of hiding the useful things just out of easy reach. Funny thing about those burrs, too, a Swiss engineer got so annoyed picking them off his dog back in the 1940s that he studied the little hooks under a microscope and invented hook and loop fastener because of it. Velcro. Every single one of us has burdock to thank for that. The big broadleaves have their own long tradition too. Folks have been steeping them and applying them to the skin for generations, across a good many herbal traditions, long before the root itself got much attention. Traditional use, mind you, not a treatment I'd tell you to rely on overseeing a doctor. Look for first-year burdock plants. The root's tender then, before the stalk shoots up tall. Scrub the skin, don't peel it. That's where a good bit of the fiber sits. Slice it thin on the bias and saute it slow in a little oil until it turns tender and faintly sweet. Number 3 is sitting in nearly every kitchen in the country right now, and most folks only think of it as flavor. Garlic carries fructooligosaccharides, a shorter cousin of the fiber we just talked about in the dandelion and burdock. Same idea, smaller chain. It slips past digestion untouched and lands right in the lap of your gut bacteria. People have grown and traded garlic across nearly every farming culture on record: Mediterranean kitchens, Chinese medicine texts, old European folk remedies, all reaching for the same bulb, centuries apart, with no way of knowing about each other's work. That kind of independent agreement, over and over, tends to mean something real is going on. A laboratory study out of a poultry research program found garlic's fiber boosted the growth of Lactobacillus acidophilus, one of the bacteria strains researchers keep coming back to, by at least 4% over the control. Small number on paper. Meaningful when you consider it's happening every time you cook with it. Here's the kitchen table catch. The longer garlic sits over heat, the more of that fiber seems to break down. A quick light cook holds on to more of it than a long hard boil does. Potent. I grow more garlic than any sensible person needs. Every September I'm out there before the frost, putting cloves back in the ground, and every July I'm pulling up more than my pantry shelves can hold. Some habits just feel right to keep. I grow the hardneck kind out here, mostly. It stands up to a Pacific Northwest winter better than the softneck varieties folks grow further south. Fewer cloves per bulb, but bigger ones. And a flavor I'll take over the grocery store bulbs any day. Crush the clove and let it sit a few minutes before you cook it. That little rest matters more than people think. Add it to the pan near the end of cooking, and keep the total time over heat short. A simple roasted bulb, wrapped in cloth and squeezed onto bread, keeps nearly all of it intact. Right alongside garlic in the pantry sits number 4, and it's just as overlooked: the onion. Onions carry both inulin and the shorter fructooligosaccharide fiber side by side, somewhere around 4 grams per 100. Researchers studying onion extract found it shifted the balance of gut bacteria toward more short-chain fatty acid production, the same compost for your colon effect we keep circling back to. What surprised the researchers in that particular study wasn't just the bacteria shift. It was that onion extract also nudged up production of compounds made from tryptophan, one of the building blocks your body gets from food. Evidence is still early on what that means for the body overall, but it's an interesting thread. Raw holds on to more of that fiber than cooked does, which is half the reason a thin slice of raw red onion shows up in so many traditional dishes around the world, not just for the bite of flavor. Red, yellow, sweet, doesn't much matter for fiber purposes. They're all carrying roughly the same range. The skin itself, the papery brown layer most folks toss straight in the compost, holds a different set of beneficial compounds entirely, and some cooks save it for stock. I cry every single time I cut one, 20 years of nursing or not. There's no toughening up to an onion. A cold onion in the icebox for half an hour before you cut it seems to cut down on the sting, at least in my experience. Not science, just an old kitchen habit that's never once let me down. If you're growing your own, pay attention to whether your seed packet says long day or short day. Up here in the Pacific Northwest, we need the long day types, or the bulbs never size up properly before the season turns. Learn that one by trial and error. Slice a small amount raw onto salads or sandwiches a few times a week. That's really all it takes. If raw is too sharp for you, caramelize it low and slow. You'll keep more fiber than a hard sauté does. Store the whole bulb somewhere cool and dark, away from the potatoes. They don't keep well side by side. Number 5 is the gentler cousin of onion and garlic, and it doesn't get nearly enough credit: the leek. The white and pale green parts of a leek can run as high as 6 grams of inulin per 100, among the higher amounts of any vegetable folks actually grow in a backyard plot, right up there with the root vegetables we've already covered today. And because it's so mild, it's an easy way to work this whole family of fiber into a diet without anybody at the table even noticing it's there. Mild. Worth knowing, the dark green tops carry far less of that fiber than the white and pale green stalk does. Most home cooks toss the tops in the stock pot anyway, which is a fine use for them. Just don't expect the same payoff from that part of the plant. The leek's been important enough, in its day, to end up as the national emblem of Wales. Soldiers are said to have worn them into battle centuries back to tell friend from foe. Not bad for a vegetable most folks here just simmer into soup without a second thought. My leeks are always the last thing standing in the garden come November, snow dusting the tops, still patient out there. There's something steadying about a vegetable that doesn't mind the cold. The Lord built some plants tougher than the season they're meant for. Slice the white and pale green parts thin and rinse them well. Grit hides between the layers. Sweat them low in a little butter until they go soft and almost translucent, never browned. Stir them into a simple potato soup or fold them straight into scrambled eggs. Number 6 is the one most prebiotic research circles back to, again and again: chicory root. Researchers studying the whole chicory taproot found it runs close to 90% fiber by dry weight once you account for the water, making it one of the most fiber-dense vegetables that's ever been measured. Most of that is inulin, with some pectin and cellulose mixed in alongside it. A review of the research literature laid it out plainly. Chicory inulin reliably feeds bifidobacteria, nudges stool frequency and consistency in a healthier direction, and the research keeps circling back to better insulin sensitivity in folks who eat it regularly. The reviewers were careful to frame it as one piece of a fuller diet, not a standalone fix. And so am I. Roasted, ground chicory root has stood in for coffee in this country since well before the Civil War, especially down in New Orleans, where it's still poured every single morning without most folks knowing what's actually in the cup. Inulin itself only got formal approval from the Food and Drug Administration as a dietary fiber ingredient back in 2018, which always strikes me funny given how long chicory's been in that coffee cup. The paperwork just took its time catching up to the kitchen. And here's a connection most folks miss entirely: Belgian endive, that pale, tight little head you see in the produce section, is this very same plant. Same root, just grown in the dark to keep it from turning green and bitter. One vegetable, two completely different disguises. Some inulin research has used doses in the range of 15 grams a day in older adults dealing with constipation, with real improvement recorded. But that's a research dose, not something I'd tell you to chase blindly. Start smaller, see how your own gut responds, and check with your doctor if anything changes that concerns you. Dig the root in fall, scrub it clean, and slice it into small chunks. Roast the chunks low and slow until they turn dark brown and brittle clear through. Grind them coarse and brew a spoonful just like you would coffee grounds. Number 7 isn't from Jerusalem at all, and it isn't an artichoke either. Folks call it a sunchoke now, and once it's in your garden, it never really leaves. The name's a mangling of an Italian word, girasole, meaning sunflower, which this plant actually is, just underground. Somewhere along the way, English speakers heard girasole and turned it into Jerusalem, and the mistake just stuck for a few hundred years running. Fair warning if you plant it. Put it somewhere it can misbehave a little. Miss even one small tuber at harvest time and it comes right back next spring, spreading further than you meant it to. My own patch has crept a good deal wider than I ever intended. Researchers have measured these tubers carrying anywhere from 10 to 25% inulin by fresh weight, among the highest of any common vegetable, chicory included, and that range holds up across multiple studies. A study on mice fed a high-fat diet found that sunchoke extract dropped the gut's pH and raised short-chain fatty acid levels right alongside it. And interestingly, it shifted the bacteria differently than purified inulin did, even though the end result on gut chemistry looked much the same. Whole food sunchoke may be doing more than its isolated fiber alone. Was it 1900-something my great-grandfather grew these back when folks called them Indian potatoes? I've heard that story told a few different ways in this family, and I won't pretend I've got the year pinned down exactly. What I do know is they've been a forgotten food crop in this country for a long, long while. Fair warning, and I say this with love, start with a small portion. This is the most fermentable fiber on today's whole list, and a generous first serving has sent more than one curious cook running for the bathroom. Build up slowly. Dig the tubers after the first frost. The cold sweetens them right up. Scrub the knobby skin well, then slice them thin for roasting. Roast at a moderate heat until the edges turn golden and slightly crisp. Number 8 is one most folks already eat, just not nearly often enough to matter. Asparagus. A fresh spear carries somewhere around 2 to 3 grams of inulin per 100 grams, lower than the root vegetables we've covered, but asparagus is a perennial. Plant the crowns once, and you'll be harvesting from that same bed for 15, 20 years without ever digging it up and starting over. Researchers studying a fructin isolated from a related asparagus species found it specifically encouraged beneficial gut bacteria growth and boosted short-chain fatty acid production in laboratory testing. Early stage work, but it lines up with what's already known about fructins more broadly. Thinner spears tend to be younger and more tender, but the thickness doesn't tell you much about the fiber content one way or the other. That's mostly down to freshness. Look for tight, closed tips and stalks that snap clean, not bend. Here's a fact most folks never learn. Asparagus plants actually come in male and female, same as some of us learned in a biology class decades back. The male plants put their energy into spears instead of seed pods, which is why growers favor them for a heavier harvest. And yes, before anyone writes in, I know what asparagus does to certain folks' urine a half hour after eating it. That's a compound called asparagusic acid breaking down, and it's completely harmless, just an odd little quirk of the plant. Some things the good Lord built just to keep us humble, I suppose. Perennial. Snap off the woody ends where the spear naturally wants to break. Steam the spears just a few minutes until they turn bright green and barely tender. A little lemon and olive oil is really all this vegetable ever needed. Number 9 isn't a weed or a root at all. It's been sitting in the breakfast aisle the whole time. Oats. Oats carry a soluble fiber called beta-glucan. It's mostly known for helping manage cholesterol. That claim's been approved on food labels since the late 1990s. But the same fiber appears to feed gut bacteria along the way, too. A controlled trial that had folks eat about 80 grams of whole oats a day, roughly 3 grams of beta-glucan, found a real increase in a bacteria called Akkermansia, one researchers have been watching closely for its tie to a healthy gut lining. It's not just how much beta-glucan you eat that seems to matter, it's how thick a gel it forms in your gut. Research comparing different preparations found the higher weight, thicker gelling versions did more of the work than the thinner ones. It all starts from the same whole oat groat, by the way. Steel cut is just that groat chopped into a few pieces. Rolled is the same groat, steamed and flattened. Instant is rolled thinner still and cooked partway before it ever reaches the box. Same starting fiber, different amount of processing between the field and your bowl. A longer trial, 12 weeks this time, had adults eat 45 grams of oat beta-glucan daily and found their bifidobacteria and lactobacilli counts both climbed alongside an improved cholesterol picture. That's a research dose, mind you. Most of us would do well just adding a proper bowl of oats most mornings. Steel cut holds on to more of that fiber structure than the instant packets do, in my experience. though even the quick stuff beats skipping breakfast altogether, which I did far too often back in my hospital years. Soak steel-cut oats overnight in water. It shortens the cook time and softens the texture. Simmer them low the next morning, stirring now and then until they turn thick and creamy. A spoonful of flax or a handful of berries on top rounds the whole bowl out nicely. Number 10 is oat's quieter cousin in the grain aisle, and folks mostly only meet it in a bowl of soup. Barley. Barley carries that same beta-glucan fiber as oats, sometimes in even higher amounts depending on the variety. A study out of Greece found barley's beta-glucan boosted beneficial bacteria most noticeably in adults over 50, which, if you ask me, is exactly the crowd that ought to know about it. Hulled barley keeps the bran layer mostly intact, and that's where a good portion of this fiber sits. Pearled barleys had that layer polished away for a quicker cook time. Still useful, just somewhat less of the fiber survives the milling process. This is about as old a crop as folks have ever grown on purpose, domesticated something like 10,000 years back, right alongside wheat, in the same part of the world where farming itself got its start. Whatever your grain of choice these days, barley was very likely there first. Researchers looking at randomized trials of both barley and oats together found a consistent pattern: higher fecal short-chain fatty acids, shifts toward more favorable gut bacteria, and effects that lined up with improvements in cholesterol numbers downstream. The reviewers were careful to note the results still varied by dose and by the specific form of grain used. Was barley or rye the grain my grandfather's people actually grew back in the old country? Family stories disagree on that one, and I've stopped trying to settle it. What I do know is barley's been part of human diets about as long as wheat has, maybe longer. Steady. Rinse pearl barley well, then simmer it in broth instead of plain water for a deeper flavor. Let it simmer low for about 40 minutes until the grains turn tender but still hold their shape. Stir it into a simple vegetable soup or let it cool and toss it through a salad. Number 11 is tiny, easy to overlook, and folks usually only remember it exists when a recipe calls for it. Flaxseed. When flaxseed meets water, it turns into a gel. That's the mucilage, and it behaves as its own kind of prebiotic fiber, separate from the inulin family we've been talking about all video. The whole seed runs close to 40% fiber by weight, and roughly a quarter of that is the soluble mucilage doing the prebiotic work. The rest is insoluble fiber, which does its own separate job of keeping things moving along. And here's a little something I only noticed writing this script. That same plant is where linen cloth comes from, the very fabric sitting on this table in every single one of today's shots. Golden and brown flaxseed come from the very same plant, just different varieties. Nutritionally, they're close enough that it hardly matters which one lands in your kitchen. I grow the golden kind out here mostly because I like how it looks scattered over a bowl of oatmeal. A randomized trial out of obese postmenopausal women had one group take 10 grams of flaxseed mucilage daily for 6 weeks. That group saw real improvement in how their bodies handled sugar after a meal, and researchers found changes across 33 different species of gut bacteria, though they were honest that the bacteria shifts alone didn't fully explain the improvement. Evidence indicates more than one thing was happening at once. Whole seeds mostly pass straight through undigested. Your body needs them ground to really get at what's inside. I learned that one the hard way, watching whole flaxseed show up in the compost looking exactly like it went in. Grind a small batch fresh each week and keep it in the icebox. Those healthy oils turn rancid fast once the seeds cracked open, faster than most folks expect. Grind a small handful of flaxseed in a clean coffee mill until it turns into a fine meal. Stir a spoonful into oatmeal, yogurt, or a glass of water, and let it sit a few minutes to thicken. Keep the ground meal sealed tight in the icebox and use it up within a couple of weeks. Number 12 has been hanging on trees in backyards across this country since before it was even a country. The apple. The fiber that matters most here is pectin, concentrated right in and just under the skin. Pectin doesn't belong to the inulin family. It's its own structure entirely. But researchers studying apple pomace and pectin have found it reliably feeds a bacteria called Akkermansia. the same one we mentioned back with the oats. A fermentation study comparing apple pomace from different varieties found it specifically encouraged the growth of bacteria that researchers associate with a calmer gut and less inflammation, particularly in samples taken from people managing digestive disease. That work is still early, done outside the body in a laboratory model, but the direction is promising. Leave the skin on. That's where the bulk of the pectin lives, and I know plenty of folks who peel it straight into the compost bin without a second thought. Tart varieties tend to run a bit higher in pectin than the sweeter ones, a good rule of thumb if you're choosing at the store. Though honestly, any apple with the peel still on beats a peeled one every time for this purpose. There's a real man behind that old Johnny Appleseed story, by the way, a fellow named John Chapman who spent decades planting orchards clear across the frontier in the early 1800s. Most of what he planted wasn't for eating fresh at all, but the habit of an apple tree in every yard, that part stuck. My own trees out back are old, gnarled, half-wild things my husband's father planted decades before either of us came along. They still bear fruit every single fall regardless, which feels like its own quiet kind of faithfulness. Wash the apple well, but leave the skin on whenever you can. Slice it thin and pair it with a little nut butter for a simple afternoon snack. Stewed gently with a little cinnamon, the skin softens but the pectin stays right where it belongs. Number 13 is sitting in the grocery store right now, and most folks pass right over it for the riper bunch beside it, the green banana. Here's the trick. A firm, green-tipped banana carries something called resistant starch. It's a starch your small intestine genuinely can't break down, so it travels on, whole, to feed the bacteria living further along. Same basic principle as the fiber we've covered all video, just from a different family of carbohydrate. A laboratory study using green banana-resistant starch alongside a probiotic strain found it eased gut inflammation in a mouse model of colitis. And separate fermentation research found that resistant starch from green bananas in particular tends to favor production of one specific short-chain fatty acid, butyrate, the one researchers consider the preferred fuel for the cells lining your own colon wall. The riper that banana gets, the more that resistant starch converts to ordinary sugar. So the trick here runs backward from how most of us were raised to eat a banana. You want it firm. You want those green tips still showing, not soft and speckled brown. If the raw texture's not to your liking, green banana flour carries that resistant starch in a much more approachable form. It's ground from the whole, unripe fruit, gluten-free, and bakes up nicely in place of a portion of regular flour in most recipes. Don't confuse this with a plantain, though they look a good deal alike at the green stage. Plantains are a starchier cousin, meant to be cooked rather than eaten raw, and they carry their own version of this same resistant starch story, a whole separate video, maybe. Backward. Choose bananas that are still mostly green, firm to the touch, not soft at all. Slice it cold, straight into a smoothie, rather than letting it ripen on the counter. Green banana flour works the same way, stirred into oatmeal or a simple baked good. And here we are, number 14, the one I promised you back at the start, the potato. And not for any reason you'd guess. Hot, freshly cooked potato is mostly ordinary starch, the kind your body breaks down fast into plain sugar. But cook a potato, then let it cool fully in the icebox, and the structure of that starch actually changes shape. It retrogrades, as the researchers call it, into a form your small intestine can no longer break down at all. It becomes resistant starch, same family we just met in the green banana. A randomized, placebo-controlled trial had adults take a small daily dose of this resistant potato starch, just 3.5 grams, less than a tablespoon, for 4 weeks. Researchers measured a real rise in beneficial bacteria, including bifidobacterium and akkermansia, plus fewer days of both diarrhea and constipation compared to the placebo group. Reheating it doesn't undo the trick either. Cold potato salad or a cooled potato warmed back up gently the next day. Both hold on to most of that resistant starch once it's formed. The structure, once it sets, mostly stays set. Rice does the very same trick, by the way, if potatoes aren't your thing. Cook a pot, cool it fully in the icebox overnight, and you've got the same resistant starch forming there too. One more small, patient habit, same underlying principle. This vegetable's traveled a long way to sit on your counter, domesticated up in the Andes Mountains thousands of years back, and it didn't reach European kitchens until Spanish ships brought it over in the 1500s. Took a good while longer than that before folks trusted it enough to actually eat it. I'll confess, I went most of my nursing career thinking a cold leftover potato was just a sad, lesser version of a hot one straight off the stove. Turns out it might be doing more for the person eating it than the fresh cooked version ever did. Backward again. Same as the banana, same lesson twice in one sitting. Cold and patient does more than hot and hurried, leastways where this particular vegetable's concerned. Funny how often that turns out true outside the kitchen, too. Boil or bake whole potatoes, skin on, until they're fully tender clear through. Let them cool completely, then refrigerate them overnight. That's the step that actually matters most. Slice the cold potato into a simple salad or warm it gently the next day. Either way works. 14 plants. Some you're growing already and pulling out by accident. Some are sitting in your produce drawer right now, going soft, getting tossed before anyone thought to ask what they were actually good for. None of this needs a special trip to a health food store, and none of it costs much more than what's already sitting in most kitchens. That's really the whole point of today's list. The good stuff was mostly already within reach. None of this replaces a conversation with your own doctor, especially if you're managing a condition or taking medication already. Some of these fibers can interact with how certain medicines are absorbed, so it's worth asking before you make any big changes to your plate. Now, here's what I'd ask you to do with all this. Pick just one plant from today's list, one small change, and give it a couple of weeks before you decide whether it's worth keeping around. If this kind of digging into the garden and the science behind it is useful to you, subscribe and stick around. There's a whole lot more growing out back I haven't shown you yet. And here's my question for you down in the comments. Which one of these 14 is already growing somewhere on your own property right now, completely unbothered, without you ever once thinking of it as food? Go on and tell me. I read every one. Until next time, go easy on the lawn and stay blessed.